There are so many ways to save on summer grilling favorites at Whole Foods Market. Invited to a potluck? Bring 365 by Whole Foods Market wild-caught salmon burgers. They go from frozen to perfectly grilled in minutes. Find classic sides for less with 365 brand organic frozen corn on the cob and kettle-cooked chips. And as always, look for hundreds of yellow sale and low price signs on aisle after aisle. Save at Whole Foods Market in-store and online.
Afila One, a whole new electric car from Sony Honda Mobility. Intelligent presence accompanies every mile. Let your Afila One drive or take the wheel yourself. Immerse yourself in cinematic visuals and 360 spatial sound. When you move with Afila One, the journey is a wonderful destination. Afila One, Wonderbound.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
We have been captured by the thieves of the night, held for ransom, if you please. Heaven help the devil. May he have a few unpleasant memories. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates the work of Gordon Lightfoot song by song, a proud member of the FM Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and along with me today, making his debut on Carefree Highway Revisited, is a fellow Lightfoot fan from Spokane, Washington, Derek Buckley. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Honored to be here and happy to interact directly and indirectly with any Lightfoot fans.
All right. Well, the pleasure is mine. How did you originally get into Gordon's music?
Well, to start off, I was born in 1965, so my life is basically the same as his solo discography. As a kid, I always remember, if you could read my mind, Sundown and Carefree Highway were always songs that existed,
Sure.
Not new, but they'd always been around. I have a brother that's 4 years older than me. He really got into the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald and just loved that song. I remember it being new. He got the 45 and just loved it. So that was kind of another one of the Lightfoot content. And then about 4 years later, we have an older brother who at the time, by 1980, was out of the house and worked at a record store. And he pinged my other brother and said, hey, there's this new Gordon Lightfoot album coming out that's supposed to be really good. Do you want one? And so he got one, and it was Dream Street Rose. And so then he and I listened to that all summer, the whole year, just kind of were consumed with it. So it was about then I decided that was the style of music I really liked and was what I wanted. And then we saw him later that year in November. We had a neighbor next door. It was a pretty young couple. They were probably closer to our age than my parents' age. So we got along with them really well. And he had the album of Sundown. So we'd borrow that and listen to it. And that fall, I just started buying up the albums I could. I started with Endless Wire and got Gorge's Gold and rode those two for a while. And then throughout high school, accumulated all the others and even got cut down versions of the original United Artists, the original five of those. But then between going to San Francisco to see my aunt and uncle, and then I went to college in Seattle for a couple of years, throughout the used record stores, I was able to find the original full uncut versions. So by the time I was an official adult, I had all of his material, and it's been my favorite ever since.
That's fantastic. And you're speaking my kind of language, because this is very similar to the experience I had growing up with him and hearing him around the house and things. What draws you or drew you to Lightfoot's music generally?
Mainly, I would have to say the lyrics. I mean, I think the stuff he writes is all on a level above the vast majority of what's out there. It's all brilliant. It's meaningful. The melodies are each pretty unique, and they always fit right in with both the feeling and the message and lyrics of the song.
A lot of my listeners and a lot of people I've had on the show really say that it is the lyrics that appeal to them. And the fact that he's so more musically advanced than a lot of his contemporaries. I mean, this is a guy who actually knows music theory as opposed to just somebody who can make up a tune and hopefully remembers it by the time they get to the studio. So that makes him unique in the pantheon, I guess. You mentioned seeing him in, I think you said it was 1980.
That was the first time, yeah.
That was the first. So first of how many?
In person, I've seen him 11 times. A few years ago, I think right when COVID was starting to crest and there was a vaccine in sight, or shortly after, he actually did a live stream, and I paid for that and got to watch it. So I consider that an additional time, but 11 real concerts and the one live stream.
So of all the times that you saw him live, was there a particular performance out of those 11 that really stands out?
Yeah, we'll do both ends of that. I got to thinking, I saw him 8 times in the 20th century and I guess 3 times in this century. In 2009, I went to see him, and it had been probably, I think, 12 years since we'd seen him. And I remember kind of curious as to how that one would be. And his voice had degraded a little bit over the intervening years. But I just remember that just being such a solid professional show. That one just stands out probably as one of the best, just because it was really tight. The band was good and he was great. And, there were other ones when I've seen him that many times, there's a lot of other times I remember leaving the shows thinking, oh, that wasn't as good as some of the previous ones, or, that one was really good, a really good solid one. So, which most of them were. That one I would probably say would be the best. The final time I saw him in 2017 was really good too. But, there's a little bit of just a couple of little things. I mean, didn't bother me at all. It's just he's human. The guys are human. Sometimes things don't just completely click. But overall, it was still a great show. The second time I ever saw him, though, in 1981, was kind of when he was at not the heights, but the depths of some of his personal problems. It was his birthday. He was obviously had been hitting the bottle a little bit before the show, and it was just not a great show. Started out the entire first half. He had already recorded Shadows, but it hadn't come out. So he just walked out, sat on a stool, and which funny, the concert the year before, he said he'd never use stools. You need to be a man and stand up. So okay. He sat on the stool and said, I've got a new album coming out and we're going to do the whole thing for you. So, which we didn't know. So kind of took some of the fun out of the first half of the concert. And then the second half, he did a lot of favorites, some of the ones we knew, but towards the end, they were, you could tell they weren't tight at all. It was really affecting him. So, which was too bad, but had a reputation here for years for a very poor performance at a concert, but he'd been back a number of times since and made up for it.
Well, good for him. And yeah, the comparisons are inevitable between different gigs that you've seen him at. And the one that you're talking about, which was kind of the nadir of his public performance life, it's completely understandable why that would stand out in a negative way. Let's talk a little bit about the venues that you've seen him in. And now I have never been to Spokane, so I don't know what the venues are like, except probably in Seattle. There are a number of them. But where did you see him perform?
9 of the 11 times I saw him was in the Spokane Opera House, which was originally built for the World's Fair in 1974. I think it's just under 3,000. I think it's 2,700. First time we saw him, he even mentioned that he really liked that facility. He called it a hall. He said, I really love your hall here. He goes, it was constructed for your World's Fair 6 years ago. And he goes, I was always honored because I was one of the first people they lined up to perform here. And so, yeah, it's a gorgeous facility. We still go to a lot of things there. The last time we saw him in 2017, he was at the Fox Theater downtown, which is been converted into a gorgeous performance area. It's probably 2,000, give or take, seating capacity. That one was really good. And one time we did a road trip to Yakima, Washington, which is probably about 3 or 4 hours from Spokane. We actually seen him a year or two prior, but he was there. And we thought, well, that's a drive we can do without having to spend the night. So we drove over and saw him there. And that was a really good. I remember that being one of the better shows. I remember leaving there thinking, man, he hit it out of the park.
That's great. The intimacy of the places that you're talking about really make perfect sense for Gordon, because he was never a stadium guy. I mean, this is somebody who really needs the intimacy of, as he said, as you said, a small hall,
Right.
to really communicate with smaller venues. Did you ever get a chance to meet the man?
I did not. A lot of the times I saw him, I was fairly young. I never thought I was never the kind to, want to stand outside the Daydream door outside and wait for him, things like that. Although there were a few shows where we kind of had some interaction because we always would know that the concerts were coming up and jump on it to get tickets. And for the vast majority of the time, we were in the first few rows. So I had noted a couple examples of those. One of the times after the really bad show, he stopped and kind of did this little apology. And I think we were right center of the first or second row. And he said, and that joke I told wasn't really, that wasn't appropriate. And well, he told a few jokes. So I said, well, which one was that? And he just kind of looked at me like, thanks a lot, put me on the spot. And another time he had mentioned in 1970, our Spokane hockey team, the Jets at the time, they played for the Allen Cup, which was the trophy for that league. And they played early Ontario here in Spokane. And he had mentioned that one time. And I gave him a little ribbing that we had won, but it was still a good game. And then one other time, and it was kind of really made me feel good. It was after East of Midnight when he hadn't done any albums in a while and the future was kind of uncertain. And he said he was going to do some songs. And, he said he'd been working on some new stuff, but nothing was really gelling. And he said, well, he said, I'm not saying I won't ever do an album, but if I do, and he just kind of paused looking for the words. And I just said, well, you got to do it right. And he goes, yes, exactly. You've got to do it right. And that ended up getting quoted in the paper the next day. They said he said it. It's like, well, okay, I'm not going to complain. My thought that he repeated got quoted in the paper, so I was fine with that. But as far as actually meeting him, shaking hands or talking one-to-one, I never got the chance to, sadly.
So your relationship is kind of from the peanut gallery with him.
Kind of, yeah. But I felt an underlying respect there on all of them. The response, it was fun.
No, that makes perfect sense. I certainly wasn't implying that you were heckling him.
No, I know.
So today we're talking about Heaven Help the Devil from the Shadows album. And I wanted to know why you wanted to talk about that one in particular today. I'll talk about it first, which is that it seems like he is making some pretty sweeping statements. This is not a particularly personal song. He only uses the personal pronoun one time. So it's a sweeping song, but it's also one where I think he's talking about a certain kind of patriotism, talking about dying for freedom, which is something that is very big in the Western tradition. That was the reason why it kind of caught my ear. So, Derek, why did you in particular want to talk about that song today?
Well, I actually labored pretty hard on picking a song. When I first heard your podcast, I thought this sounded like something fun. I have a top 4 that had already all been done. So I started going through them and listening to ones and thought, okay, is it a song I really like? Does it really resonate me? Would it make a good discussion? And probably, I don't know, the second time I listened to this one, I thought, okay, there's a lot of meat there to talk about. And also going back to the quasi-terrible concert show in 1981, because he was doing the Shadows album, it had not yet come out, so the audience didn't know it. He did kind of explain a lot about the songs and maybe how they came into being. But the one I so distinctively remember him talking about this song, that in the wake of the Iran hostage crisis, which was basically the impetus for it, he said he had been talking to some woman somewhere about politics, and she said, well, the devil is still alive in Iran. And
meaning the Ayatollah.
Exactly. Wherever along the spectrum you want to place it. But she said that, and it just kind of woke him up. And he kind of went on a little talk about, we're different countries, but, we share the same continent, we share a border. He's always thought that, Americans and Canadians were like brothers. And he says, I always like to say we were cut from the same cloth. And he specifically referenced the beginning of the whole Iranian hostage crisis, that Canada helped get some of the diplomats out. There's a Ben Affleck movie that actually is about about that situation. It's a little embellished, but it's a really good story. But he talked about that the pairing up the Americans and the Canadians, there's probably not another pair of countries in the world that would have tried to pull something like that off for each other.
Yeah, so, I figured that it was about that because it was composed around that time. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about my own research about that in a second or two. So there is a certain affinity that Canada and the United States had during this time, and the hostages were American, of course, but Canada was certainly in sympathy, and the cooperation to get the diplomats out actually makes perfect sense. Is there a setting for you where this is the soundtrack of a certain activity or a certain time of day or a certain season for you, or could you play this literally anywhere?
Of course, I would enjoy it anywhere, but I think this one needs to be heard in the mostly dark, because I think it relates to the world and guiding principles of life and things like that. I think it's best kind of you focus inward. So to me, the ultimate environment would be in the dark. I mean, maybe even kind of a cold, slightly rainy outdoors, just to add a little ambiance to it. Part of that might be that, I first heard it in late November, and at the time, the weather, most of my activities outside of school were usually somewhat in the dark, and just hearing this one, to me, I want as much just in my mind. I want to cut off the rest of the world.
You living in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, that is the prevalent weather for much of the year, not all, but much of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I would actually want to listen to it in the day, but I would want to listen to it while I'm up in the air, in a plane, maybe even parasailing over Lake Tahoe. Just looking out the window and seeing for miles and miles and miles, and pondering how transcendent the song is in so many ways. I don't know that it's fair to call it an anthem, but it certainly is a transcendent song, and it's talking about evil and good in a way that you don't often hear from Lightfoot, who was not a particularly religious man. I have no doubt that he was a spiritual man, but certainly not a religious man in the traditional sense of the word.
Right. One note I had that kind of dovetails into that is I am in no way a religious person, but I've always felt that this song, maybe more of a literary work, is just the title in so few words evokes so much. And maybe we can get into this later, but just the whole concept of heaven, the expression itself, heaven help, whatever, kind of means like you're going to get clobbered and need some kind of external divine help, and that we will be the ones invoking that upon what we see as someone who doesn't care for us or is out to harm us. But I think we're kind of right on the same page there. But that did remind me just that the title alone holds so much.
Yeah, and I've only thought of the title as being supremely ironic. Heaven help the devil. And
right.
Those two are the juxtaposition between those two entities could not be further. They're bent on destroying each other, or they're absolutely diametrically opposed to each other. So the title, just at a glance, is supremely ironic. But then when you get into the texture of the song, it has a whole lot more meaning to it. We'll be right back to our conversation with Derek Buckley about Heaven Help the Devil. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two. Hey, I just wanted to take a second to tell you about my latest podcast discovery. Firebreathing Kittens is an actual play one-shot podcast that plays various tabletop role-playing games with a season-long plot. Because there's a beginning and an end to each week's story, you can start at any episode. Yeah, you won't miss a thing. Every week has a different combination of 4 from the same rotating cast of people. Join Firebreathing Kittens as they solve detective mysteries, attempt comedic banter, and enjoy friendship. That's Firebreathing Kittens podcast. Check it out.
In 1942, when the world needed a hero to fight the forces of evil, a woman had the courage to step forward. Her name was Helen Meeker. Her adventures took her across the United States and behind the lines of both the European and Pacific fronts. President Franklin Roosevelt trusted her judgment. Adolf Hitler put a price on her head. And in the face of overwhelming odds, she battled through everything that was thrown at her, dodged death countless times, and challenged the most diabolical figures in history. The star of more than 20 novels, Helen Meeker proved her grit and determination time and time again. And now the Long Highway Players bring the book series to life on the airways. These exciting dramas will place you in the middle of the action, immerse you in riveting drama, plunge you into unimagined intrigue, and confound you with dark mysteries, while giving you the opportunity to live adventures in a time when the fate of the world hung in the balance. Enjoy the exploits of Helen Meeker and follow author Ace Collins's In the President's Service series on That's Not Canon Podcast Network.
This is to reinforce what you said, but this is a on-stage quote that he made during a concert, maybe the first time he played this, I don't know. He said about this, and I'm quoting directly, a sociological type of song that can relate to just about anything in the world today, and those of us who are peace-loving people can understand this. I was talking to Ken Taylor, the Canadian ambassador to Iran, and I said, would you ever go back to Iran? He said, not even for dinner. And I wrote this song just after the hostages got back, meaning the 52 American hostages came back in 1981. But it relates to everything. I mean, sometimes you wonder what is going on in the world, and it seems to be almost too much to bear all at once. So we'll do this one for you. It's called Heaven Help the Devil, and you see what I mean when you do this song. It means heaven help the son of a bitch. And the song, interestingly enough, is not mentioned in Nicholas Jennings' book at all. Not a single word is said about this. And which is kind of interesting because that book is fairly comprehensive about all the songs that he had done up until the time the book came out. Right. So I'm not sure why Jennings didn't address it or at least give it a page reference in the book, but he didn't do that.
Yeah, I was kind of expecting that. I actually bought the Jennings book for my brother for Christmas years ago and said, when you're done reading it, let me know and I'll borrow it from you sometime. And I hadn't, so I finally got it, I don't know, late last year and read it near the end of the year. And I got the Kindle edition. So when we were prepping for this podcast, I thought, this will be easy to pick something out of the Jennings book. And I just searched for the word heaven and it's not even in there. I was pretty stunned that this at least didn't get some kind of mention.
Yeah, because it's such a great song. But to be fair, there are other songs that Lightfoot wrote that didn't get mentioned also. True. We'd have to get Nicholas Jennings on, and he probably had some reasons why he didn't mention this. So before we get into the lyrical analysis, the thing that I noticed when I read the lyrics, and I have to say that I read the lyrics before I listened back to the song, is that the song is written in triple verses or triad rhymes rather than the quatrains we all hear, whether it's AAAA or ABAB. So this is all AAA and then BBB, the rhyme scheme. And that's a very rare thing in Western music. I don't remember ever seeing that in another work where it's three rhymes and then three different rhymes and then the chorus. Have you heard about that in another contemporary song?
I have not, and I never realized that until recently. I listened to it a number of times in the past week or so, and reading the words last, I had already kind of figured it out, but it did hit me that it just, something wasn't standard about it. And I looked at it a few times like, oh, wow, it is. It's the three lines, and then the chorus. And I even looked online at the tablature, the guitar tablature for it, and was kind of looking, it's like, yep. It kind of verified what I was thinking was it's in groups of three, which I hadn't really stopped to ponder it, but you articulated what had been in my mind for a number of days.
Well, if you could read my mind, Derek, what a tale.
I believe it.
To quote a phrase. Okay. In this land of chance, do we know right from wrong? And the fact that he's calling this into question, I think kind of indicates the state of mind he was in. Do we even know right from wrong anymore? And we're not sure who we is. We'll talk about that mystery in a second or two. Even at a glance, we know the road is long. And it makes me wonder, the road to what? I mean, are we talking about the road of life? Is this a quest in search of something? Those two lines are full of mystery. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on just the first two lines, what exactly he's talking about in that particular context.
I think he's just setting up the outlook on the world. The first line, in this land of chance. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen. Everybody's life is maybe not a crapshoot, but, it's just things are going to happen regardless. And I think it's just kind of about the land of chance is just the potential of having to navigate whatever is thrown your way. And the do we know right from wrong? It's just kind of questioning, where are we at? There's an assumption we all know what's right and what's wrong, but the lines get blurred. And I'm just thinking, the first line is pretty much like a statement of life. What's going to come at me? How am I going to react? Take a step back, though. It's the we, the plural, is always, at least for me, gets back to what I was saying earlier, the whole thing about, the Canadian-American brotherhood. It's kind of like, I think the we in there is those of us that care about each other, that support, that think we're doing right. And then it kind of spills over into the other line, even at a glance, we know the road is long. I think the road is just what you said, the road of life. I think that's a perfect way to describe it. It's like, I'm going to deal with a lot of stuff. So, just knowing that it's a long road, there's a lot there that I'm going to encounter.
Yeah. The thing that you said just reinforces the idea that the United States and Canada have an affinity that is unlike any two other countries that either one is affiliated with. I mean, obviously, there's the connection with both of us to Britain, Australia, I suppose, because it's a major English-speaking country. But the association between the Americans and the Canadians, both from shared experience and just the geography, leads us to, and a largely overlapping culture between the two of us, really just reinforces that the we is English-speaking people in North America, for lack of another way of saying it. Most of us do not believe in come what may. And if we say that us, this would be, again, Americans and Canadians together. I think it sounds like he's saying we're not fatalists. We're not people who say que sera, sera. That fatalism may have been in vogue at some point, but it's not useful in the current context. We have a stronger desire for a certain kind of life than, well, just whatever happens. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot more purpose to that kind of living than there would be just kind of, okay, well, I'm just going to wait to see what happens when I go out the door this morning.
Yeah, that's my take too. The us and the we. I think you can make the argument that it's intended to be both individually and collectively, be as an individual and as a member of society. Again, the whole brotherhood concept. The other line right before that we don't owe a single thing to anyone, that always stood out to me, because a person may think, well, I've done my part, I've done my contributions, whatever. It's like, I'm not on the hook for anything that might come along. I've done my share of the basics or of the societal obligations. Those couple lines together just pretty much reinforce what you say about it. Not being a fatalism, but it's just being more of a practical, like we're here, we're doing what we need to do and taking care of ourselves, which I'll get into later on.
Yeah. And we're the captains of our own destiny. And yes, we don't owe, he didn't actually say this, but we also don't owe an explanation to anyone about what we believe and why we believe it.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Believing in the civil liberties that you find in our Constitution and in the Canadian charters and things like that. Everything we fought for was in vain, they say, even when called upon to throw our lives away. And two historical things come up for me in that. Everything we fought for, okay, well, that was World War II, was the time when you think most about Americans and Canadians, and in very particular, the beaches of Normandy, where there was a Canadian beach and two British beaches and two American beaches, or however many it was. I don't remember the exact division. But then the other thing is that throwing our lives away, we hear that a lot in the context of the Vietnam War, which I understand that Canada was not involved in militarily, but that for a very long time in the United States, we had this idea that if you fought in Vietnam and you were killed in Vietnam, that you died for nothing, because at the end of the day, the United States did not accomplish its objectives, and there is no more South Vietnam. I mean, the place is all one communist country. And that's a view that I think as time has passed, we're a lot more empathetic and a lot more generous and a lot more loving and compassionate to the Vietnam veterans who did come back. And we also have the outlook that the war was so badly managed that we did not have a way to accomplish anything meaningfully. You put that together with the historical context that you've mentioned, which is the hostages in Iran, and it falls into place a little bit more. Did I leave anything out with those two lines?
No, your analysis is pretty spot on. That's what I think. I think in the context of the song, and again, knowing it was written about the hostage situation, which did not come to a conflict that involved soldiers, I think it's a little bit of a pushback on what we said earlier. I think it's saying, you're willing to pay the price when necessary. I think it's being deliberately a little nebulous. Everything we fought for was in vain, they say, like there's doubt. Maybe we sent troops somewhere that were needed, and it's not an all or nothing thing. And kind of what you said, the whole concept of throwing our lives away being synonymous with a failure, or that it wasn't necessary, that it shouldn't have had to have gone that far because the lives that were lost were wasted. I think it's a little bit of a blurring the lines. Not everything's going to be that way, and we're going to do what we need to do. We might not know. Maybe we don't know if the end goal is worth however many lives end up being lost. But I think it's just kind of extrapolating a current mindset into the future that could happen, has happened, may or may not be a part of life, both, again, for individuals and society. He's deliberately just trying to kind of make it a little vague, but pull in the feelings that you're talking about. I mean, your concrete example is one thing, and if a similar situation were to come along, it may or may not be the same.
Yeah, and we can say that in the hopes that a similar situation never has to come along.
Right.
As we're sitting here in 2024 in a world that in a matter of 6 minutes we could all be dead, which is a scary thought, certainly. We have been captured by the thieves of the night, held for ransom, if you please. And now that we see that this is written in light of the American hostages in Iran, the ransom is they wanted the Shah back in that immediate context, but that's essentially blackmail. The idea that, okay, well, we give you the Shah back, and then the Iranians said, okay, well, what else shall we think of before we release the hostages? Heaven help the devil, may he have a few unpleasant memories. And usually when you think of unpleasant memories, we think about failures or we think about embarrassments. And I also think that if we say that the Ayatollah in this sense is an embodiment of the devil, and if we think of the devil as being somebody who's not for peace, but is somebody for war, who is not for love, but is for hate, who is not for cooperation, but is for violence, that the idea is that we are going to disappoint him, that we are not going to go the easy route of we're going to nuke Tehran or we're going to capture some people just to get back at the people who follow the Ayatollah, etc. And so I don't know that Gordon had the Ayatollah in his head specifically, but this diplomat probably did. And the other experiences that you've mentioned, okay, I can't think of anybody else he could be pointing at.
I always have this little mental image of the Ayatollah when I hear that line. I just kind of was looking at it as you were talking, and I think one of the things he might be trying to get across is a little more general concept of you caused this situation, started it, you better feel some of the pain too. If the world is just, you will feel some of the consequences of it as well, and not just us.
And as it turns out, Iran and Iraq ended up in a war that killed I don't know how many people in both those countries. And while we don't know whether the Ayatollah felt anything personally about that, we do know that the Iraqis at one point wanted to have a truce to the war, and the Ayatollah wouldn't hear of it. So it was a war that apparently only the Ayatollah wanted to keep going. In these times of trial and uncertainty, I have thought, what does this freedom mean to me? And I guess we're talking about a freedom that at its very basis given what we're talking about, is the freedom of religion, the freedom to believe what you want to believe or not believe what you don't want to believe. Because Iran, then as now, is a theocracy where you don't have the ability to do that. And I think that's only one aspect of it. Obviously, we're talking about a lot of the freedoms that you and I take for granted. But the freedom that I think Gordon is talking about, that's the first thing that I think of because of the historical aspect. What can you add to that?
I pretty much agree with what you say. My concept of that has always been he's referring to kind of the Western lifestyle or the general freedoms we have, that in our world, they can't always be taken for granted, and it's not necessarily the same elsewhere. So yeah, I think he's juxtaposing the two political systems, two cultures together, being wary that recognizing that you're probably on the better side and that contemporaries may or may not be.
But he's doing it in a gentle, angry way.
Gentle anger. Perfect.
Yeah, as opposed to Ted Nugent saying the Ayatollah is an assahola.
Yeah.
Which was obviously a very popular sentiment at that time. Our love for each other may not be explained. We live in a world where tears must fall like rain. Most of us don't wish to cause each other pain. And as I listen, I think this may have been his reply to people who, at the end of the 1970s, the beginning of the 1980s, have really written the human race off. In this country, we had the agony of the Kennedy assassinations. We had the Vietnamese War. We had Watergate. Now we have this era in the 70s where it doesn't seem like we can get anything done. And then we're not able to get our hostages out until the very last day of Jimmy Carter's presidency. I mean, he's sticking up for humanity, as it were, as opposed to people who would look at all the experience I've just mentioned and said, okay, this country is finished. This culture is finished. We've got no place to go.
I pretty much see it the way you do. I think he's acknowledging that there's this camaraderie that just kind of happens. Live in a world where tears must fall like rain. Everybody's always got something to deal with. Everybody goes through those pains for the most part, but then he turns it around. And that was one of the lines that's always hit me too, was that most of us don't wish to cause each other pain. I think it's really powerful because that's the general concept, and this might apply to both sides too, even though the government's a certain way, you always have to keep in mind that the citizens of oppressive regimes don't necessarily hate you the way that their leaders do. And they probably, given the environment you have, would probably just be people you would get along with. So yeah, he sums up a lot there. We're kind of in this together. Everybody deals with stuff. And for the most part, the ones that want to inflict the pain are few and far between. They just can get in positions where they can do it.
Yeah, and the people who would wish to cause each other pain are not the ones listening to Gordon Lightfoot songs.
True.
We'll be right back to our conversation with Derek Buckley about Heaven Help the Devil. But first, a word from a podcast partner or two.
Hi, this is Audie Martello, the host of the Mostly Folk podcast, a 60-minute foray into the music we all love. You will hear newly released albums, classic folk, country, and bluegrass music, as well as some traditional music that may or may not be true to the genre. Sometimes irreverent, often opinionated, but always entertaining. You may even hear a radio magic trick every so often, as well as numerous interviews via Zoom and telephone with established as well as indie artists. Mostly Folk is available wherever you listen to podcasts, and always at mostlyfolk.org.
The American West is a place of lore and legend, of triumphs and tragedies. No one can tell the true stories of the West better than author Rick Steber, and now there's a podcast showcasing his work. It's called Writing the West, and every episode will feature his short stories and his poetry. If you want to know the true stories of cowboys, pioneers, miners, and Native Americans, This 15-minute podcast is for you. Writing the West is available on Spotify, Audible, Podbean, or wherever you get your listening matter. That's Writing the West, the work of Rick Stever. To every unsung hero in the universe, to those who roam the skies and those who roam the earth, to all good men of reason, may they never thirst. Now, as I said before, Gordon was not a particularly religious man, but what was brought home for me when I thought of this was something he had to have known and had to have been exposed to, and that was the portion of the Sermon on the Mount that says, "Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, and blessed are the peacemakers." And we know that Gordon grew up in the church, that he sang in a choir when he was a little boy. And they're very good sentiments, leaving aside whether anybody has a particular belief in JC. I think that may have been part of what he was saying there. And also realizing that some of the people who are pursuing peace and righteousness will end up suffering for it.
Mm-hmm.
We have wings to guide us through the timeless sea and faith that will remain through all eternity. And that's the most beautiful part of the lyrics in my mind. And I think he's talking about faith in human goodness, but he's not necessarily talking about a deity. He's not talking about religion in any meaningful way. He's just talking about human nature. And then, of course, you have a repetition of the chorus. You'd agree with that?
Yeah, and really quick, I had a note too. I missed on the previous part about the unsung heroes and the to those who roam the skies. The last line too, the to all good men of reason, may they never thirst. That kind of evokes a salutary feeling, kind of like what All the Lovely Ladies has, where you're just kind of acknowledging these people that, you know, are kind of for the good and do good without acknowledgement. Then the final few lines kind of bring that into us as more of a grouping.
That's a great parallel to think about, you know, All the Lovely Ladies, which is set in a different mindset, different set of circumstances, etc. But I love the idea that there's a salutary aspect to it. I hadn't thought of those two songs going together, but they do. So yeah, thanks, Derek.
It just hit me today, actually, as I was thinking this, that, you know, I wrote a note in about, you know, that he's really acknowledging the good people. And then it just, oh, yeah, I know where else he has done that. It's not the first time. So we'll like the whole song, but I mean, there's a lot of power in there.
Well, the song did originally appear on Shadows, and that was his 15th album and came out in 1982. And it blows my mind to think that he had gone through that many albums in that short a time, but there it is. And I got to say, my favorite musical aspect of the song, this is one of the few Lightfoot songs that I don't think needs an acoustic guitar. We associate his music with playing the 12-string or finger picking the 6-string. At this one, I almost felt like you could take the acoustic guitar that's kind of buried down in the mix, and it wouldn't really hurt the song very much. But I love the fact that you have that very 80s type keyboard, but then you also have the steel guitar that is complementing the keyboards really well. That combination is just magical. And Pee-wee did a brilliant job at that. What is your favorite musical aspect of it?
First of all, let me say I totally agree with what you said. I had not really thought about that, not needing the guitar, but the 80s synthesizer keyboard sound that introduces it. I thought the guitar was good to kind of pull it back a little more into the kind of folky mindset that just kind of goes with his previous decades of songs. And I often wonder, though, too, had that song come out a decade earlier, if they would have done, you know, the violins like they do on some of the songs on If You Could Read My Mind instead of a synthesizer, it would have been a little different. But yeah, you're totally right that it could almost get away without the guitar. My favorite musical aspect of the song, though, probably the keyboards on the introduction, because it's, I don't want to say uplifting, it's just kind of, it's a strong feeling that draws you in. And then I think when it goes from that and jumps to the fairly, at the time, light guitar work, it kind of like it draws you in on, this is something going to be really significant, but then the song starts at a much more casual sound that leads into the lyrics. So that unique introductory sound, I think really just kind of sets the tone, literally and figuratively.
And then the people who played on this record, and I believe this is only the second song from the Shadows album that I've covered on this podcast. You have the usual lot, which is Gordon, Rick, Harry, Barry, Michael, and Pee Wee. You had Dean Parks playing electric guitar along with Patrick Miles. And then you had Herb Pedersen doing harmony vocals, although I can't tell whether that was he or Lightfoot doing the harmony vocals on this song. What we do know is that Lightfoot played this song in concert only 5 times. And the first was in May of 1981 at the National Stadium in Dublin, Ireland. So maybe he did play some stadiums, but not many. Gordon Lightfoot was not Journey, I can tell you that. And then most recently, he played in the Southam Hall in the National Arts Center in Ottawa on April 3rd, 1982. And that was it. So every time he played it, he did it in the space of 11 months. The concerts that you saw, did he ever play it in any of the ones that you were at?
Well, the 1981 one, when he did the whole album, when I first heard it, he did for sure, where he told the story, which that concert, I think it's listed on set list, but it doesn't have any content. I tried to look at the few other ones for the shows I've actually been at. I do not remember ever hearing it for sure once I was familiar with it. I mean, I know I heard it that one time for the first time. I didn't know it at the time, but I do remember it. It had a somewhat of an impact on me then, but I wasn't intimately familiar with it. I don't recall hearing it at any other shows, sadly.
And the odds are that you wouldn't have heard it because he only played it the 5 times that we know of. There may have been others, but set list is reasonably reliable.
Yeah, at least it gives you good proportion.
Yeah.
For 5 times out of what all they've got on there is probably a realistic fraction of when he played it comparatively.
The song was not released as a single. I can completely understand why, because it's not a pop song. It's a beautiful song, but I think it's probably a little bit too cerebral for the pop audience in 1982.
Yeah.
The album went to 16 in Canada and 87 in the US. It didn't chart in Australia and it didn't chart in the UK that we know of. So you said that you'd heard the whole album played live, and I'm going to assume that you also own or have owned at least one copy of the album on vinyl or digitally. Why didn't this album sell better? I mean, Wikipedia says this is a commercial failure, but the critical reception of the album was very positive.
I don't know. That's a tough call. I kind of wonder if maybe it was a different sound for him coming right after Dream Street Rose, which it seemed to fall a little more back to his traditional sound after Endless Wire and Summertime Dream. I think it kind of did a little bit more to the acoustic falling back. It was heavily produced, but I still think it had much more of an acoustic sound. And a lot of the songs on Shadows, I think, kind of what you talked about earlier, they kind of have more of a modern keyboardy sound. And I just got to wonder if his normal fans, that kind of wasn't appealing to them. I don't know. This is purely conjecture, but the material itself there's a lot of great stuff in there. So I would think that the fans that had been listening to his music for at least the entire decade of the 70s would have caught on to that a little more. So kind of would be my best guess as to why it wasn't more successful.
I don't have an explanation for it either, except that it wasn't the Gordon Lightfoot that everybody had grown up with, for lack of a better term. I mean, Dream Street Rose, he still had connection to that. Obviously, Endless Wire, he had connection to that. When you get to Shadows, and then especially when you get to Salute, it's really not the same artist. And I think in some ways he was going through, I don't want to say a crisis, but he was trying to reach out a little bit more in his musicality. And commercially, it didn't work. Artistically, it worked because pretty much everything he ever touched artistically worked. But in terms of sales and in terms of what people expected when they listened to Gordon Lightfoot, it probably wasn't it. It would be like going to an AC/DC show and having him play Peter, Paul, and Mary, or having the band play Peter, Paul, and Mary. It doesn't work. That's a dumb analogy, but I think she gets the idea.
It gets the point across. Yeah.
And it's just been re-recorded by one artist, Kathy Cowett, and that was in 2007 in her CD Songs for a Winter's Night, which had a lot of Lightfoot and a lot of Jim Croce. Have you heard her version?
I have not heard the entire thing. From your notes, I looked her up, and on her website, there's a 30-second clip of it, which it sounded like a good, clean rendition.
Yeah, I would like to get Kathy on the show to talk about her own experiences and maybe talk about a particular song, not this one, but, another one. So Kathy, if you're listening, please be in touch. Derek, as we're kind of wrapping up here, who would you like to hear cover this song from modern music, if anyone?
I hear you ask that on a lot of the episodes, on every one. And so I gave that some thought, and I came up with a few artists who I think the sentiment gets in their wheelhouse, but not a lot that I think could pull it off. And I kind of had it into two groups, kind of more of a similar to Lightfoot group, which I will give you names in a minute because I want to hear your take first. But for some reason, when I was first thinking this, it wouldn't be her, but somebody with the vocal chops of somebody like Adele that could just belt out the verses really well would be good. And who I kind of settled on for maybe that role might be Brandi Carlile. She's kind of in the Americana realm. She's definitely got the chops to be able to sing the intense parts intensely and the soft parts softly. Don Henley, it's kind of in his wheelhouse, but I don't know how well he'd do. But I did kind of fall back to some of my other favorite musicians, and some of the stronger female vocalists, Lucinda Williams, Mary Gauthier, or Patty Griffin could probably do a good version. But I think I have somebody that could hit it out of the park. But give me your thought first, and we'll tie them together.
Well, I like the choices that you've made so far. I think Adele could do a lot of different Lightfoot songs, including this one. Brandi Carlile, I'm not quite as familiar with. Don Henley, he's not well known for singing other people's songs.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, if he were to do a cover album, I'd be interested in hearing that. I mean, he did Come Rain or Come Shine, but that's an anomaly for his career. The only person that I thought of who could talk about patriotism, and this is a song that may be just appropriate for one particular time period. I'm not certain of this. Willie Nelson in his prime, I think, could have done a decent job on this. It's hard for me to think of a modern artist in Gordon's genre who is as liberal as he was and as liberal as this song purports to be, where we're talking about peace being better than war, where we're talking about the cooperation of all nations, the great traditions that go into folk music, at least the folk music that you and I grew up with. There's not many people in that genre anymore who I think could do this and their fans wouldn't sort of say, what the hell? That's my own thoughts on it. But you said you'd come up with someone that would hit it out of the park. Who you got?
Your explanation just now, I think someone that could do it, and he's one of my other favorites, and I already had him on the list, would be Steve Earle.
Yeah, there you go.
It's his kind of thing, and he's right where you were talking about, and he's pretty versatile. I think he could do a pretty good job on this.
I hadn't thought of Steve Earle, but I think you're right. I think it could work. So we'll see if that ever happens. Derek, let's address the elephant in the room. Where were you and what were you doing when you heard of Gordon's passing?
Well, it was Monday evening. I was sitting in our den TV room, just flicking through Facebook on my phone, and I saw in one of the groups somebody had posted that he passed away. And I thought, well, hopefully this is somebody posting garbage or jumping the gun or something. But it did stick in my mind, the recent concert postponements, which turned into cancellations. So I checked news outlets really quick, didn't see anything, and I thought, okay, sadly, there's one gold source for celebrity deaths. So I went to TMZ.com, and sure, it was the top thing that he'd passed away. So I went and told my wife about it, and then I called my brother, the one that had gotten Dream Street Rose, and let him know. He and I went to most of those concerts together. Our older brother was a big music person, so I called and let him know, and then just kind of sat on it for the rest of the evening. I was kind of numb and just, I knew it was coming someday and wasn't totally surprised because of some of the things that had happened recently. But the next morning I decided I'd go out, pick up some breakfast type food and coffees and stuff. So I got in the car and listened to my 4 favorite songs as I'm driving around, and then just kind of started dealing with it. I intended at the time that before too long I would kind of do a complete listen of everything I have, which I have not yet done, but I'm a little more listening to him, kind of thinking that it's knowing that the things are a little different now, but it's still such a big part of my life and everything.
And he is, I think, getting some recognition that he didn't necessarily get when he was alive. That I like to think of him as being everything that Dylan was as a lyricist, everything that Joni Mitchell was and is as a musician, because he was able to blend those two so beautifully in a way that I think neither one of the two artists I just mentioned did on their own. So he was a true treasure in that regard. Derek Buckley, thank you so much for taking the time today. Loved the song, loved our conversation. Would love to have you back on the show again real soon.
I would love that. Just let me know. I'll do another scouring for a good song that hasn't already been covered.
And thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it. Carefree Highway Revisited is on Apple, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you get your listening matter. Our website is www.lightfootpodcast.com. I'd like to make a special request for you to visit my Patreon page. I love this show so much, and I want to keep it going, and you're in a position to help. Please head over to www.patreon.com/Carefree Highway Revisited. $1 or $2 a month is all I ask. You can reach me, Mike Messner, at teachermike72@gmail.com. Well, our next episode will feature Will Kruger making his second appearance on the show, and he and I will be talking about Peaceful Waters from the Lightfoot album that came out in 1966. That episode will be dropping in early April of 2024. Until then, for Derek Buckley, this is Mike Messner reminding you, run for the roses, but don't forget to stop and smell them. We'll see you next time.
Is your cash working hard for you right until the very moment you need it? It could be if it was in a Wealthfront cash account. With Wealthfront, you can earn 4% annual percentage yield from partner banks until you're ready to invest, nearly 10 times the national average. And you get free instant withdrawals to eligible accounts 24/7, 365. 4% APY is not a promotional rate, and there's no limit to what you can deposit and earn. And it takes just minutes to transfer your cash to any of Wealthfront's expert-built investing accounts when you're ready. Wealthfront. Money works better here. Go to wealthfront.com to start saving and investing today. Cash account offered by Wealthfront Brokerage, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Wealthfront is not a bank. The APY on cash deposits as of December 27, 2024 is representative, subject to change, and requires no minimum. Funds in the cash account are swept to partner banks where they earn the variable APY. The national average interest rate for savings accounts is posted on FDIC.gov as of December 16, 2024. Go to wealthfront.com to start today.
Everything from clothing to household items are getting more expensive each day. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by shipping cheap parts around the world to whoever can sew them the cheapest. And now you, the consumer, are paying the price with rising costs. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. Skip the tariff and snag yourself American-made clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.
You don't need to use an oversized AI model for everything, just like you don't need to use an axe to slice a cake. Find out how smaller models can deliver the right results and help cut AI costs up to 90% at IBM.com. The AI built for business. IBM.